E3, the only place where you can watch Talk Fuji make an ass of himself live on stage.
Yes.
For the last 20 years, E3 has been the place to be if you wanted to see the newest, biggest games before anyone else. It's where the AAA companies come to strut their stuff and show the gaming press just what they have to offer. If you weren't part of the games industry in some way though, you had to wait for secondhand reports from some guy that gets paid to regurgitate information regularly. Now, with the advent of this mystical thing called the internet, everyone can see these CG trailers and fake gameplay videos at the same time. So long as they have half-decent internet. Yes, now we can all watch Aisha Tyler drop her spaghetti live on stage.
It's hella fucking smoky, apparently it's 420 in this bitch.
Other than some pretty laughably awkward presentations, the last few years have been kind of disappointing and repetitive. They've really just consisted of a main course of yearly sequel rehashes, a side of big franchise sequels, if we're lucky, and a sprinkle of new IPs for games that almost no one will bother to remember, as well as a lot of titles that just aren't what's advertised. The traditions continued year after year, and while this year was full of firsts and big changes, it was full of just as much bullshit as every other year.
But like, as far as stupid gimmicks goes, Aisha's the best fucking one.
Bethesda's always been in a sort of depressing situation when it comes to E3. They've historically had the most anticipated games of every event, but when they actually did announce things, they were shoved into the Microsoft or Sony conferences to present their games for the respective company's console and then leave so Dance Central could take center stage. This year though, Bethesda had enough of being just part of the crowd and decided to start their own press conference. And out of all the ones that happened this week, theirs was definitely one of the best, with a big focus on actually showing the games. They had a solid lineup of titles to show off. Doom looks a little dull in the visual department, but action-filled enough to be promising. Fallout 4 dialogue options, unsurprisingly, looks amazing. Even the stupid companion app no one will use looked well done. Dishonored 2 was a CG trailer showing off Spider-Man skills, and the Fallout spin-off mobile game, Fallout Shelter, actually isn't the worst thing ever. They also had some pretty mediocre games like Battlecry, the Elder Scrolls Online expansion, and a new mobile card game, The Elder Scrolls Legends, explaining that whole lawsuit with Mojang over their Scrolls card game. For their presentation, they were basically flawless. There were almost no technical hiccups, and apart from Todd Howard talking for a little too long and showing off Fallout 4 fan art, there was a little time spent stalling between games. At these sorts of conferences, the game should come first, and that's something Bethesda nailed here. It was a strong start, and I think it got most of us pretty excited to see just what the rest of E3 held for us.
This game has changed millions of lives, including my own.
The last 2 years of Microsoft have been, lackluster to say the least. With the Xbox One, Microsoft's goal was to create a system that does it all. Television, movies, voice commands, motion gaming, traditional gaming, and it did it all. Really poorly. Their emphasis on games was still there in previous E3s, but Kinect and the video services were their biggest pushes, bundling the Kinect with the Xbox One on launch. This year though, Microsoft made an almost complete 180, and we saw a lot of things they said they were never going to do. One of the biggest announcements of the entire presentation was the addition of the previously demonized backwards compatibility. Yes, now we can play games we already played without buying a remastered edition. They announced a new controller that's fully customizable and also costs $150 US. Most impressively though, they showed off the HoloLens with Minecraft, really getting their use out of that $4 billion purchase. It looked impressive, if a little fake, and gave a small glimpse of what was possible for gaming with that augmented reality technology. There was even an announcement of Xbox Preview, which is early access for consoles. Now even console gamers can play unfinished games, not like they haven't been already. Even with the great features and technological announcements, there was no shortage of games. There were the obvious titles, Halo 5, Forza Motorsport 6, and the new Gears of War, now simply titled Gears 4. But there were also new, unexpected announcements. Recore from Keiji Inafune and Retro Studios was announced with a CG trailer. Fallout 4 has mod support first on Xbox One, an unprecedented occurrence in console gaming. We saw Microsoft's attempt at an arena combat game of their own with Gigantic, a new game from Rare about pirates accompanied with a bundle of 30 of their classic titles, and Garden Warfare 2, because the first one was immensely popular, I'm sure. If you're big on exclusives and interested in getting games to play, this was definitely the conference for you. Lots of exclusives, a great lineup, and a big emphasis on the games. More of what we wanted to see, but after this, it was all downhill.
Damn, that looks just like me. There we go. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Nobody likes EA. They haven't done anything in the past decade to really earn anyone's respect. They've shut down more game companies than anyone else in the industry, and they've almost single-handedly turned gaming into a product over substance economic dogfight between developers. This conference did them no favors, and was easily one of the most uninteresting parts of the whole week. They had their big name titles. Mass Effect 4, now Andromeda, was announced. There was Star Wars Battlefront, which looked great, Need for Speed, which looked terrible, and Mirror's Edge, which looked like Mirror's Edge, all of which were accompanied by a really strange push for mobile. We were shown a cinematic trailer for a Minions mobile game at E3. What a time to be alive. There was also another mobile card game based on a long-existing franchise. Oh, and an expansion for the Old Republic, because that's still relevant, right? Definitely the worst thing about it was all the sports games. Pele seems likable, he's clearly a big presence in soccer, or as everyone else in the world would call it, football, but that went on for far too long. The announcements of these yearly releases that see no changes should have been as quick and simple as, yeah, we're still doing it and moving on. But at least now I know who the Hoop God is. It was bad. Almost as bad as...
We should come up with a meme really quickly for this show. Right now I'm pitching who kept the Christmas lights on during the apocalypse.
The last 5 years of Ubisoft and E3 have been terrible. They've always felt like watching an older family member try to act hip and with it, and watching them fail miserably. Whether it's the hosts, the live musical performances, or the consistent use of fake trailers to conjure up hype for something terrible, Ubisoft never fails to be the cringiest and as a result, funniest press event to watch. The whole thing was rife with dank memes and celebrity guest appearances, but Matt Stone and Trey Parker were the only ones that really mattered.
First of all, I'd just like to say that these mics are fucking dumb.
Their new South Park game, The Fractured But Whole, was a great way to start off, and For Honor looked really amazing, but other than those, the rest of their new games and the usual suspects were extremely uninteresting. The lack of actual gameplay footage coming out of Ubisoft was really disappointing. It made for a show that was more focused on saying nice things than it was about showing nice things. The actual gameplay footage we did see was at least more choreographed than Jason Derulo's performance, but the whole presentation was just as boring. They didn't generate a lot of hype for anything and barely showed any footage of their games, CG or otherwise. After the way they've treated their latest releases, this hasn't done much of anything to have consumers put their faith in them again. At least we got a new Bay out of it.
Now you can trust me, I've tried the new supers and they are delicious!
Sony won E3 was all I saw on Twitter. They showed off loads of footage for highly anticipated titles like The Last Guardian, which looks like the PS3 version, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was just a CG trailer, as well as promising new titles like Horizon Zero Dawn and Firewatch. They also announced that Shenmue 3, a sequel to a now dead franchise, is getting a Kickstarter, because apparently that's something that needed to happen at E3. Morpheus was discussed again for a little bit, and we saw their new television streaming service, PlayStation Vue, that's already sounding better than most cable packages. They're even the Call of Duty console now, getting all of the content first instead of Microsoft. They certainly had something for everyone, and it really did look like Sony had the biggest and best press event. But behind of all of these fancy CG trailers, I mean, they showed maybe 2 or 3 actual gameplay trailers, Sony was pulling some of the most anti-consumer crap ever and deceiving viewers in a way only EA could love. They had the most DLC, the most exclusive content, and the most beta announcements. All of their reveals made the titles seem like exclusives for PlayStation 4, when in fact they're just coming to PlayStation 4 first and other consoles later. They had signs that made these statements very clear, right behind them. And in trying to blind viewers to that fact, they used the sheer awesome that was the Destiny expansion? And the artistic creation game from the Little Big Planet guys? How exactly did they win this again? I mean, they didn't even remember to plug in the damn controller. A Disney Infinity seems exciting.
3.0 starter pack that is exclusive to PlayStation platforms.
So this is real dancing! And I just hope you're hungry!
Nintendo had a great start to the E3 week, hosting the first Nintendo World Championship in 15 years. It was exciting, and a great way to show off some of their new and upcoming titles. For their actual press event, they took the Nintendo Direct approach again instead of a traditional live presentation. I assume because of what happened the last time they did a live one.
I like French food. But before
It allowed for one of the funniest things Nintendo's done in a while. Too bad the selection of games was lacking. There was confirmation that we wouldn't be seeing the new Zelda title weeks before this, but Star Fox coming back was nice, and a new multiplayer handheld Zelda is great. Outside of that though, the announcements weren't anything to write home about. They were mostly things we already saw coming or already knew were happening, but the total surprises like the new Metroid Prime Federation Force and Animal Crossing titles were really interesting, and also were met with a lot of backlash. I've seen gamers get upset about nothing more than a few times, but this was mind-boggling. Some Metroid spin-offs and a Mario Party-style Animal Crossing game resulted in more anger from a bunch of fanboys than I've ever seen. The lack of big titles to announce really hurt Nintendo's event overall, but at least everything they showed is coming out soon, which is more than can be said for the other companies.
What was it like on stage?
It was terrifying.
Some of the biggest games at this year's E3 were Square Enix titles: Kingdom Hearts 3, Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, Just Cause 3, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake. They even had some amazing surprises like a new entry to the Star Ocean franchise, a Hitman reboot, and a sequel to the incredibly niche Nier. Even the mobile games looked pretty interesting, but man, was that boring. I don't know how Square Enix did it, but they found a way to make Just Cause 3 seem boring as hell, and the footage was full of explosions. They were another one of the companies to do a lot of talking instead of a lot of showing. We saw a lot of fancy CG trailers showing things we'll never be able to actually do, and then different Japanese men in suits telling us how great their new game's gonna be. If it wasn't for their stellar lineup, they would have been the worst press event of E3, hands down. Not even the press members could get into it. I'm not sure what compelled them to clap for themselves for 3 minutes, but it was good nightmare fuel.
A great game is more about what you don't put in than what you do.
It's the first time PC gaming has had direct representation at E3, and that can only mean good things for the mainstream appeal of the platform, but this press event didn't exactly meet the expectations I had for it. It was unconventional, going for a more talk show approach to delivering information, which sounds interesting on paper but resulted in a lot of empty discussion. We had the extremely charismatic Day 9 interviewing developers and company executives regarding their titles, and he did a great job of keeping things light and fun. Plus, he actually cares about video games, unlike some other hosts. We had Phil Spencer come in and announce that Gears of War Ultimate Edition is going to be on PC, making it the first time we'll get to play a game from that series on the platform. There were also first-time reveals of new expansions and DLC for games like Pillars of Eternity and Heroes of the Storm. We saw a lot of surprises, a lot of love from Microsoft, and No Man's Sky coming to PC. In terms of games, there was a lot to see, and that's great. That being said, the regular misconceptions of the PC master race carried over to this event. Every interview had a mention of graphics and visual technology, of 4K resolutions and processing power, instead of just focusing on if the games were good or not. AMD, being the sponsor, naturally made every attempt to show their new graphics cards, but this raises a question that concerns me. Since Nvidia is their direct competitor, and this is an AMD event, I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up seeing an Nvidia-centric gaming event in the future, and that sort of binary consumer separation is something nobody wants for the platform. There wasn't a Half-Life 3 reveal though, so it was shit.
The easy way that Xbox can win this convention is basically announce the Tomb Raider Gears of War crossover.
This year's E3 was really polarizing when it came to the games. On one hand, almost every single AAA release was a sequel or reboot, and the new IPs just got cinematic trailers and barely anything else. On the other hand, the indie games have gotten a much bigger spotlight than ever before. Beyond Eyes, a visual narrative piece, was on the same stage as the latest Gears of War. Puzzle platformer Unravel was nervously revealed at the same conference as Need for Speed and Star Wars Battlefront. These games are incredibly original, and it shows just how important indie games are to the gaming world. But this year's E3 solidified one belief for me, and that's how absolutely useless it is. There are more games coming out every week than the number of games that were shown at this conference. Every day, we get an announcement of a new upcoming title. Kickstarters pop up all over the place, and the internet creates an environment where in a mere couple of days, a game can instantly become a cult classic. Having a huge, centralized event like this just doesn't make any sense anymore. The number of games that were announced ahead of it because of the sheer size of the event was ridiculous. Even Fallout 4 had to have a reveal ahead of time to generate hype and get people interested in watching Bethesda's event. The addition of PC gaming helped bring it into the more modern space, but the number of games that didn't get a single second at that event made it even more apparent just how useless this is to the majority of developers. Things like E3 made sense in a time when the internet was less accessible and there were fewer developers, but since there's so many things going on all the time and so many developers doing said things, it becomes impossible to give attention to all of the titles that deserve it. Some indie and even AAA games weren't shown in any capacity apart from a few seconds of a trailer. E3 has always resulted in rushed games in order to have something to show off, and that's doing nothing but hurting the industry. I'm not saying E3 needs to die. It's the greatest hype machine that gaming has. It's still the place to see what the big developers are doing, but we know exactly what they're doing. It's the same thing every year. There were just as many cinematic trailers, exclusives, and DLC as ever. Early access became a mainstream console gaming thing, paid betas are more and more common, and E3 plays the giant spotlight on these shitty practices. If there's anything good that came out of this year's event, it was that gamers got more games to play, and that's awesome, even if they did bitch about it. Who won? Who cares? We got more games, and that's all that's ever really mattered.